let us know if a mic cuts out or you can't hear us. That would be appreciated. Thank you. All right, so the first, Kristen Shorey is here. Deb Wallace is here. And Mikey Grant is here. And I'll just say this for there's not a lot of people in the audience, but the policy committee members change and are interchangeable depending on what the policy is that we're looking at. So if we don't have anything that we feel is principal, HEA, whatever it might be, sometimes it's just the three of us. Obviously, in past meetings, you've seen principals here, curriculum coordinators, so it just kind of depends on what the policies are that we're bringing forward. So that's why the people change. All right, let's look at the first one, BDD, School Committee Superintendent Relationship. Obviously, that was one of the things that we had identified in either our June or our July meeting. I apologize, I don't remember which one we actually looked at this one in. But I felt like it was important to take a look at what that relationship looked like. Since 2006, there's been at least 3 superintendents. I think I'm the 4th one since that time frame. And so I just wanted to make sure that we have kind of that working baseline. So I sent away to Maine School Management for the sample policy, and they sent it back, and Charlotte Bates, she's the director of policy there, former attorney, and she said, some policies just stand the test of time, or at least are standing the test of time. So if you look at the sample policy that Maine School Management sent back, that's the MSMA BD, you almost have, it's almost verbatim. And one of the things that I thought was really interesting is that they have one optional, and I'm jumping a little bit here, but down on D, hold all board meetings. So they have one thing that you could potentially add in, or we could potentially recommend to add in, but for the most part, well, I shouldn't say for the most part, it's identical to what it was in 2006.
Yeah, and since I've been on the committee since, this is my 3rd year, so in the last 2 years, we have only asked, and that was before you, superintendent to leave once, and it was really around the evaluation process, but other than that, and we did include him after, so yeah, I would say that I'm in agreement with the current writing of D.
One of the things that I really like about this policy, and I'm glad it's stayed in there, just giving my opinion on some parts of the policy, was letter F, evaluate the superintendent and provide appropriate opportunities for the superintendent to share his or her perceptions regarding the working relationship between the school committee and the superintendent. And if you look at our evaluation protocol, it allows that to happen at the midway point and at the end of the evaluation cycle, which is obviously in May and then in June. So I like the fact that it's seen as a two-way reciprocal relationship, because obviously I liked how it was explained one time. The superintendent is this weird dual position of the CEO of a very large company and is the secretary to the school committee. So it's like it's such an interesting contrast of responsibilities when you think CEO / administrative assistant. So I like the fact that it gives me the opportunity to let the community know what I think about how things are going or where I have concerns, and so I'm looking forward to obviously having that conversation when the evaluation cycle comes around. So any concerns, looking at additions, looking to add anything? I know for me, I have an opinion on D, and where it says optional, the board may want to add specific languages if the superintendent attends all meetings of standing and or advisory meetings. I would prefer that not be in there.
Yeah, but that's what I was referring to, is the way that we have it written, I think, is appropriate.
Obviously, one of my goals is
Bring it to the committee, obviously.
right. I mean, one of my goals is to continue to attend town council meetings to the best, that I can, and obviously just other meetings that might fall outside of whether it's superintendent, regional meetings, and things like that. But right now, I feel like it's a pretty strong policy, and clearly it hasn't changed much since it was amended in 2006. Any other thoughts on that? So what we will do is we'll recommend this as just as being reviewed. We don't have any edits to make, so we'll just recommend review, and we'll be able to put 2022 on that policy. All right, let's go to KDB, Freedom of Information Act. This wasn't in our policies to be reviewed when I created the agenda back in August. I went to a free Drummond and Woodson training in Portland a couple weeks ago, and there are some parts of the new Freedom of Information Access that we have incorrect in our current policy. Most of it is regarding fee structure, and so we want to make sure that, obviously that doesn't mean we follow old policy, but it's important to reflect what the new law is. So we'll look at KDB. Okay. So when you have the first paragraph, the board recognizes the importance of a well-informed public. That is essentially the same minus the board versus the school committee. The board designates the superintendent to act in the absence of the superintendent. We don't have an assistant superintendent, but certainly someday if the district grew to that, that would be something you could go back and add in. At this time, I would recommend removing it and not including that. And we also do not have a public access officer. So the superintendent acts as all of that, so that is my responsibility, is to respond to the Freedom of Information requests. Similar to the third paragraph, working off the main school management, the superintendent, same thing. If the district has one, we don't. And any other person, we don't. We don't have a designated public access officer. So that means that it's my responsibility to be trained in what is a mandated training on the requirements for Maine's Freedom of Access Act. And I have done that, which is not a very in-depth training, but it has been completed. So if we or I were to designate, for example, if we had a superintendent, an assistant superintendent, or perhaps we said, based upon the number, we have to also include the curriculum coordinator, might be a good example of somebody that could be a public access officer, then we would have to put that person through training, subsequent training, which again, it's not in depth, but we would want to note that and put it in our for our records. So that's just a note under requires each school unit to designate an existing employee. So we don't obviously include any notes that main school management includes. Then they give you some definition of by the virtue of their status as public officials, the superintendent or and assistant superintendent. So we can, same thing, we can strike assistant superintendent until we actually have one. So if you look at by virtue of the stat, we can strike assistant superintendent. Would you be okay with that? Just continuing on that line of thought without the assistant superintendent. Okay. And then it gives you the time frame, so you have to go through that FOA training no later than 120 days after assuming the position. As with school board members, moving on to the fifth paragraph, as with school board members, the person designated as a public access officer may meet the training requirements by, and this is where it outlines the training again, it is not a complex training, must be made available by the state of Maine on the frequently asked questions, access the website, or by completing other training courses that include all of this information. And that can be through Maine School Management offers that training, as well as Drummond and Woodson. So it just depends on where it would fall in 120 days. But that's a training that's pretty accessible, and to me that time frame is more than generous when you look at roughly 4 months of time to get that training done.
So right now you wouldn't have anybody from the committee do that at this time. Because I remember people were sending those requests to Jesse, so that isn't an appropriate way to request information.
No, it is okay to send it that way, but they always get forwarded to me as the officer, public access officer. So then I respond in turn to, CC Mr. Keith on any of those requests, and I'm the one that ultimately responds to that. In different districts, talking with the area superintendents this last Friday, again, some of them, whether it's like over in Hamden, or I met with the superintendent in Oxford Hills, they have assistant superintendents. They actually kind of tag team the Freedom of Information Act. It's a pretty common thing that's happening right now in respect to just seeking information. The nice thing is, if it's not a Freedom of Information Act, if it's a request for, I had a good one came in a day or two ago regarding student numbers. And so like, what's the breakdown of numbers? It wasn't a Freedom of Information Access, so that's something that if I did respond to it, I could ask like the administrative assistant to respond to, like, hey, can you send off our accounts for superintendent agreements, or whatever the request was for. So it is only applicable to the Freedom of Information Act, not requests that come in outside the act, right? So I would like to know what this is, and we try to respond, obviously, to those requests as well. They don't make every effort. Just because it's Freedom of Information doesn't mean that it doesn't, we try to not bump things on the priority list, but that certainly, the Freedom of Information Access Act, right? And that's what the attorneys really try to emphasize in respect to access, is that you are going in and providing a document that you are, well, we're going to see that later in the policy, but you're going in and providing access to a document. And the important part when you're doing that is that you're not breaking any confidentiality FERPA. And so that's where that training comes in particular, is if we have to get into dedaction or removing something from written record that wouldn't be allowed to be accessible, even within a document that it is accessible, but making sure that we strike things if it would give away, obviously, confidentiality. So. Moving on to the sixth paragraph. Except as otherwise provided in the statute, all board proceedings shall be open to public. Any person shall be permitted to attend, and any records or minutes of such proceedings that are required by law shall be made promptly and shall be open to public inspection. So obviously we keep, as you know, Mrs. White keeps written records, and we respond to those requests if people want to see what the minutes are, and we post those on our website as well. Board agendas, minutes, proposed and approved. Board policies, annual budget reports, student handbooks, board member freedom of access training, documentation, certificates shall be made available for immediate inspection or copy at the superintendent's office. Requests for all public records shall be made, preferably in writing. So superintendent, to the superintendent. So again, that's definitely something that I have, but also Mr. D. Ford talked to me, because he does get some forward requests as well. And sometimes Ms. White will also get forward requests, or the business manager will get forward requests. And again, you kind of like, this is kind of a funneling process. It all ultimately comes back to me as a person who's been trained, who then checks the information and then distributes the documentation accordingly.
I'm just curious about the wording in that bottom paragraph on the sample about shall be available for immediate inspection. I am just curious about, how much time do we allow Jody to get things ready and completed when she's taking the minutes of the meeting and all that. I think we need to be respectful of that.
Yeah, I mean, I think it just depends on what the item is, because I think that, again, for the most part, any request that we have, people have been very reasonable. There's some things, for example, like when you're looking at budget end of the year, audits don't get done until, for example, we have the auditors coming in starting next month. And so we'll have the final numbers for the 22 budget finalized, probably in December, somewhere in that time frame, and we'll be able to send out those requests that came in for final budget numbers. But then some stuff, whether it's like attorney fees or whether it's, again, student enrollment, we try to turn that right around, or agenda meeting minutes, like, yep, we can print it off and and send it. You do have 5 days to respond,
Okay.
that you acknowledge the request, and then you try to give a reasonable time frame for how long that will take to pull that information. And again, sometimes you just are very honest and say, like, it could be a couple of weeks, it could be a month, but as soon as I get it, I'll send it to you, and this is my time frame. I think there is something later on in this policy regarding, well, no, what should be regarded as a reasonable period of time for producing records for inspection depends upon the circumstances. We had a couple in June that came in right in that June 10th, 11th window, and it was, I'm acknowledging the request, but because of school ending and just our business office, and I think it was a financial request that might not be accurate, but I feel like it was. And we state that, due to the end of the school year, we will not be able to have this done until July 1st, you know, and so we will state whether or not we're in a busy season or we are working on something else, or again, if we're waiting on an auditor for the final numbers, because we just don't want to send out that document until the auditor has approved it, and now it becomes a, you know, again, another formal record or publicly accessible record.
I think that's a question that I had that Kristen brought up, because when
Can
immediate,
you hit your mic?
I'm not here.
No, that's it.
Sorry about that. Immediate, because the minutes from the meeting are not available immediately the next day. I mean, it takes time to have them transcribed and uploaded and those kind of things. So that was a question that I had as well. Do we, you know, as long as people, as soon as possible, you know, immediate doesn't mean instantaneous, because it may still be in the process and not a finished document that's available, so.
And what I try to do again is in those letters to those individuals who make the request, try to give them that time frame, a reasonable time frame in which it'll be available, or it's on its way to you right now in the mail. So sometimes it's that quick. Sometimes, most of the time, it takes a few days beyond that. So, yeah. If the request is denied, the superintendent designee, so obviously you can continue to keep designee in there. I think that right now, where you don't have anybody else, I think that designee is probably a good thing, just because we could have that public access officer that might fall. I don't see assistant superintendent coming along anytime soon, but I can see somebody else in the district going through the training. If we had a lot of financial requests, or we had a lot of student enrollment requests, or whatever it is, and putting, somebody like a Jody or a Jamie through that particular training. So I do like the fact that they have a designee there, just in case we feel like we need to promote somebody to that position. So if the superintendent/designee shall inform the requester in writing within 5 working days of the request, and shall state the reason for denial. Otherwise, inspection and copying may be scheduled to occur within a reasonable period of time following the request at that time. That will not delay or inconvenience regular activities. So that kind of talks about that example of the end of the school year, or waiting for the auditor, or whatever it might be. The school unit is not required to create a record that does not exist. It's pretty self-explanatory. They give you a note on a reasonable period of time. Electronically stored public records. In compliance with the Freedom of Access Act, the school unit will provide access to an electronically stored public record as a printed document or an medium in which the record was stored at the requester's option, except that the school unit is not required to provide access to an electronically stored public record as a computer file if the school unit does not have the ability to separate or prevent the disclosure of confidential information contained in or associated with that file. The school unit is not required to provide access to the computer terminal. So basically, you're trying to, if you get a request, for example, for emails, right, we're not recreating, like pulling, copying, pasting. I'm actually taking the email and printing it as it would have been, right? So, how you print an email and you can see the date and time and the Gmail and, all that other stuff, right? So that's what it's saying there. However, obviously, if we're providing an electronic record and it's attached to something confidential, what we obviously do is we scan those records, right? We review those records for anything that is confidential. And a lot of times that's involved with our students, but it certainly could be, there are certain things within the system that, for example, payroll deductions and health insurance benefits, those things are not public records. So again, we scan those things and we try to separate those out or redact them in a way that is not obviously going to break confidentiality. And then if we can't separate them, we state that. So like we can't provide you this record, but we wouldn't be obligated to then like hand over the computer and say, you can look at this, but just not this part, right? So it just kind of sets those boundaries for the electronic files. Another note there, questions, attorney, Dr. Oh, yeah, okay. And then up to the top of 3. So this was actually where our current policy doesn't meet the recent legislation. I think it was in October of 21. Except as otherwise provided by court order. You can charge fees, so you have, and I already filled in the blank, so you can, a fee of 10 cents per page to cover copying costs. That's considered by statute, a reasonable fee is no more than 10 cents, excuse me. So you can set the fee as a recommendation. So you as a committee could say 5 cents or 2 cents, but you can't charge more than 10 cents. So we have, in our old policy,
It was 25.
I think it was 25. Right?
25.
Yeah. So obviously we cannot charge 25 cents a page. And the maximum you can charge is 10 cents. So we have the option to make a recommendation here on what we would want that copying charge to be. If it's color, it's about 10 cents. And if it's black and white, it's in that 2 to 3 cents range. So I wouldn't recommend fleshing it out that much, but
Yeah.
I'm not saying, like, oh, I did it color, that cost you 10 cents. But I feel like, again, when you start talking about fees, most people are not requesting documents that are hundreds and hundreds of pages. They're usually only a page or 2, and honestly, a lot of it's at discretion. So if I feel like it's going to cost a ream of paper, I'll charge the fee. If it's a couple of pages, I don't charge it. That's just, so I feel like 10 cents is a really reasonable cost, especially if it's going to be a massive amount, but most of the time we don't charge the fee.
Yeah, I mean, I think we can bring it to the committee as 10 and then see if there's discussion about it and what people think. I mean, in the next section, we had $20 per hour after the first hour, but this states not to exceed 25 after the first 2 hours. So it kind of evens out in a sense, but we could, yeah, I think we'll just go with what not to exceed, and then we can talk about it as a committee.
Yep.
I don't want to be a sole decision maker in that.
No, and I think when I have more of an opinion on the fee,
Yeah.
and that is, I do think it should stay at 25, and the reason being is that typically when I have a request that exceeds 2 hours, so we've had a couple, what you're looking at is most of the time, that fee is going to be, at least in my limited experience, that fee is going to be charged for financial records, because you're starting to talk about whether it's warrants or payroll or grants or whatever it might be. Typically you have to involve the business office, and so if we're at 2 hours and I'm then saying, you know what, this is going to be 4 hours or 5 hours or, you know, whatever, again, we're trying to pinpoint, and I'm going to talk to the business manager, say, here's the request, how long will this take? And they give me that time frame. Let's say it's 4 hours, for example. So the first 2 hours are free. When I'm looking at 2 more hours on top of the 3 hours, it's time I'm pulling the business manager and or the assistant director from their duty. And for most of our people, they're in that $20 to $29 range hourly rate. And so for me, if we're going to be pulling them away from their job, we ought to be compensated for what they would have been doing, right? They're not doing the job performance duties that are expected. So I do think that 25 is a really fair number. And again, the amount of FOAs that are going to exceed 2 hours, they're limited. They're not I have been very few that have been over 2, but they usually are around finances. So that's typically, I think, a pretty safe number to, I think it's a safe number, a reasonable number to put on there. All right. This paragraph, and that does reflect the changes in legislation. So we would be aligned with that. And again, just because it's in our policy at 25 and 20, we will not do that because it breaks the law, right? We just want our policy to be updated and accurate, and we're gonna do what, we're not gonna say our policy says 1 hour, so too bad. No, like, this is the law. I know what our policy says, but we're gonna go with the law. We'll go through our 2 readings and then obviously make it official policy. If conversation of a public record into a form, if conversation of a public record into a form susceptible of mutual or oral, that's embarrassing, oral comprehension, should that be, that's right? Yeah.
Which section?
I'm on C,
Okay.
that's a word, right?
Yeah, for
Yeah,
sure. Oh,
that should be.
oral means ear.
Oh, yeah, okay, it's not oral, like, oh, okay,
Oral means ear.
yeah.
So if it was like an audible, if it was an audible,
Oh, yes,
file,
okay, which,
and then it wasn't comprehensive,
yeah, okay.
then you would probably close caption or transcription or something like that.
Yeah, so if we by law required to keep, we by law through town charter are required to keep a verbatim copy of our school board. Currently, we're doing that audio file. So if somebody requested that audio file transcribed, we would charge conversion on that. So a charge for actual mailing costs, we do not do that. It's good to have in there just in case it was something massive, but we typically do not do that. No fee shall be charged for inspection unless the record cannot be inspected without being compiled or converted, in which case paragraphs B and C apply. So basically they're just saying that, like when I'm going out and I'm starting to pull documents and I'm just looking through them really quick and saying, okay, like, what is this going to entail? How much time? The time doesn't actually start there. The time starts when we actually begin the request. So there's kind of that assessment in which we're not charging. And then as required by law, the school, you're going to provide the person making the request an estimate of time. So what happens is, in a couple of situations where you start getting into those really big numbers of the total cost, for example, exceeding $30, we let people know that beforehand, before moving forward, so that they know that this is going to cost them money. If it's over $100, if the estimated total is greater than 100, we can request that they pay, or if they've been requested to pay in the past and they don't, then we can request that up front prior to starting that work. So that just kind of protects our time in case, and also gives people an idea of, do they really want the document? They can also request the document broken down in different ways. Again, we don't have to recreate records, but if they said, you know what, I asked for January to December, I'm going to ask for January to May, right? And that might make that, I asked for 2 and I don't want one. It might change the scale a little bit, so they have to pay that out of pocket cost. So
Back to D,
Yeah.
where it says a charge for the actual mailing cost, you said we're not doing that at this time.
that's correct.
So should we put that in parentheses, that optional or something to that effect? I don't know.
I think we can continue to leave it as is. I mail almost everything certified because it is a formal request, and so I like the fact that you've made this request and I'm sending it certified and I know you got it. And that way it never comes back that the school wasn't responsive. But at the same time, it's not something that we charge the $650 or $750 or whatever for. So again, for right now, I don't see there to be a need for that because we're not exceeding our postage limit. But if we got to a point where from a postage, obviously we budget postage. So I think if we ever got to the point where we were getting so many requests that it was starting to, really adversely affect our postage budget, I would say we ought to probably do that.
Could you put in could be charged?
We could do that, absolutely.
Just so that depending on the circumstances, the bulk of the material that was requested, but just
A possible fee.
a possible fee, something to reference that it's possible, but not a definite thing, depending on the circumstances.
Yeah, yeah, right. So, charge for actual mailing costs. Charge
May
for the actual
apply or
mailing
something like
costs. Mailing
that.
costs
May apply.
may apply, yep.
I like
Yep, may apply to mail a copy of the record. Okay, yep. And again, this is one of those, it's just like the fees and the 10 cents per page. There's so much of it where you're like, yeah, I could charge this person 22 cents to mail this and photocopy. But at the same time, it's just not, that's not what we're about, like, we just kind of plan on some of these costs, because that's part of it. So I like to try to avoid fees unless, my big one is if it's gonna be more than 2 hours and I'm gonna have to pull somebody from our department to do it, because it's that, 2 hours is quite a bit of time to put stuff together and to look at information and to process through an email or to look at whatever it might be. When you start getting into 3 or 4 hours, that's a significant request. So to me, that B is the most important one, and then after that, A and C, I don't feel like it's usually necessary, to be honest. But it is good to have in there just in case you received so many requests that you needed to start doing that. Any other thoughts or questions on K, D, E? You're hearing us okay, right? Everything's good? Sound-wise? Okay, thanks. We're doing good on time. We're only halfway through. Short. All right. And B, E, D, H, public participation at board meetings. So you have our policy from '04, and then you obviously have the main school management sample policy there, public participation at board meetings. One of the things that I really like about the opening in the sample policy is that kind of framework that the policy gets set in. I really like it. I like the fact that board meetings are conducted for purposing on official business for the school system. The board meetings are open to the public. The public is invited to attend, participate, provides this policy.
Is
Thought
that
that was
students?
siren.
Yeah, I thought it was the
a
wind.
siren.
Okay. The policy applies to only meetings of the full board, not subcommittee meetings, though we are going to see something later on in this policy that I think would be a good recommendation. So, but obviously it doesn't apply to subcommittee meetings such as this one. But they are open to the public, although board meetings are not public forums, so it's a limited public forum, right? You're the school committee, you're creating an environment for participation because you're doing business, and the board will provide appropriate opportunities at its meetings for members of the public to express opinions, concerns, related matters concerning education. The intent is to allow a fair and adequate opportunity for the public to be heard while ensuring that the time allowed for public discussion doesn't interfere with the fulfillment of the school agenda. And even at the last meeting, we had a significant amount of public comments, and we were able to move through, obviously, a pretty significant agenda and a lot of information. So I think right now, what's currently in practice is going well. We just need to have an updated policy not from 2004. The board will designate a portion of its agenda, the third paragraph, as an opportunity for public participation. During the time allotted for public participation, members of the public may speak on any subject directly related to the operations of school, except for personnel matters or complaints concerning specific employees, which shall be addressed through established policies and procedures. Which obviously, several meetings, last meeting we put out our complaint policy just so that people know. And I did appreciate I don't know if it was the kid or the parent or somebody did speak to the fact, like, we have already talked to the building principal, we have talked to the superintendent regarding the honors classes, and so we're bringing this concern to you. So, I mean, even in that process got followed, so that's a really encouraging thing when the processes get followed, and then that's your opportunity, right, for them to come and bring that concern to you. So I really like how this just sets what that framework is for, we want to hear from you, and these are the protocols that you should follow, right? Where it's going to set the stage for the public comment. So one of the interesting things in the optional language, so optional additional language. Public comment may also be invited just prior to board discussion of individual agenda items requiring board action. So you currently have a rule that sets this in your school committee rules. In the old policy, you don't have this. So to me, we want to make a recommendation to the school committee to continue to follow its rules and or to change its rules so that it reflects what is in policy.
Meaning having the flexibility to put it somewhere in the agenda.
Right. So what I like about this is that public comment may be invited just prior to the board discussion of an individual item requiring board action. So if we, for example, had a new agenda item of a track, and people in public comment wanted to speak to something not on the agenda, right? You see that often in town council,
Yeah,
they
on the
speak.
agenda or not on the agenda.
Exactly.
Right.
Then you could say, we are going to take public, and obviously the chair has the right to say, we are going to take public comment on the track. And he could open it up to people to come and speak to the track. And that would be the process in which we would ask people to participate, right? So I like this policy because again, it sets a very clear groundwork for, we want to hear you speak if you would like, but then we'll also open it up on certain items. Again, at the discretion of the chair on certain items, or certain agenda items, excuse me. And then, right, there would be that clear, now the school committee is going to discuss, or vote, right, take a motion, then discuss, and then end with some type of vote, right, decline, yay, nay, or abstain, or table, or, you know, whatever it might be. Or maybe no action, there might not be necessarily any action right on an agenda item. So this fits in with your rules. I reached out to 2 area superintendents. They do not allow public comment after the opening public comment, so they don't allow comment after, like, they've had their X amount of people have spoken. They then go into their agenda, that's it for public comment. There's another school district in the region that they do one, kind of like our town council, at the beginning, at the end. So I think limiting it to just the beginning, probably not best practice. I don't know if I would want to end there. I think it is better fits at certain agenda items. And then you as a committee again can decide, like, we're going to have public comment on this, or no, this is an item we're just going to discuss and then move on to the next one. It gives you some flexibility, but it gives people the opportunity to speak to items that aren't on the agenda and then on the agenda.
Yeah, I think that's a good idea. So one of the things in this, and I was going to say, in the other ones, we just have to make sure, like on this particular sample of EDH, we want to have committee versus board in all of the aspects. And also, as the English editor, I don't like starting sentences with although.
Which one, where's that?
Second paragraph.
Oh, yeah, yeah. School committee meetings are not.
Right, I know. And then again, making sure school, I think that we should bring, you know, obviously this is gonna be the first meeting or whatever, the meeting for the committee, but based on how things have been going and also how people want to give input at other times, I do think that having public comment only at the beginning is limiting.
Yep. And if you only offer it at the beginning, like they have it in their note there, if you only offer it at the beginning and you say you can't speak to anything that's outside the agenda, then you're not really meeting what the statute is intended to accomplish, right? So, you know, I remember obviously sitting as a principal in the mass meeting, getting ready to talk about masks and the right, wear a mask, don't wear a mask. You know, we have a really respectful community that can share opinions on one side of an issue and on the other side of an issue. And obviously, I think if we got to the point where we were running into 9 o'clock every board meeting and not getting through our things, we could reconsider, or we could limit how much, I mean, right, and that is all allowable as we move through this policy. So I think making a recommendation for this part, optional language to include it, I think would be, again, I think it would be a good thing.
So in that third paragraph where it says the committee will designate a portion, or we should maybe put parentheses S, portions of its agenda.
I think what we should do is strike obviously optional language and just pull that public comment all the way over as its own standalone paragraph, one sentence. Public comment may also be invited just prior to committee discussion of individual agenda items requiring committee action, and that would be a standalone statement. Because it would say we have it here on the agenda, and we also might invite it for such, and I think, for example, like the track would be a great opportunity, right? That would have been a good opportunity for public comment, right? That would be, you want to hear from your public you want to hear from your public in general, but certainly when you're talking about finances, specific item, SRO, great opportunity for public comment, and seeing it on the agenda gives people the opportunity to, I can get up and speak to what I believe on this particular item, and I think that's a good opportunity, and I don't know, I just think it makes a lot of sense.
Yeah, and some people may not have gone to the town meeting, but then heard about it and wanted to come here to talk about whatever might be on both agendas.
Yep, absolutely. So we wouldn't, obviously we don't have anything on that note. And then again, you have another note there because the public comment is so ambiguous. Sorry, that's not included. No. Pull that over. And I'll ask Ms. White, obviously this will be in the board packet, so we've had my note taking to her note taking is dramatically different. So we're working through her taking my notes and then making it policy. So if you notice an error, just please let me know. Okay, so then you transition to one of the things that, I'm jumping ahead. Members of the public, top of the sample, members of the public may address the board within the guidelines provided in this policy. The chair is responsible for maintaining proper order and compliance with the guideline. The following guidelines shall apply to public participation at school meetings. So in our policy, there's that P. It's policy meeting, and that's the one that's going to crack. Of course, it was saying 100 times now. All right, so I spoke with our attorney a couple of days ago regarding this specific policy and item. Written correspondence may be directed. So this is in our policy, number 1. And this is something that we should keep. This is well intended with the spirit of what we're trying to accomplish, and certainly we have done that in past practice when we have had somebody who cannot attend. We have written, right? We've read that, and I think that's certainly something that we want to continue to keep. Again, we can always revisit it. So that being said, you kind of have this awkward, where do we put in? I think this is where you would put in number 1 is right after members of the public may address the board within the guidelines. Number 1, written correspondence may be directed to the school committee through. And then you can go into the actual guidelines concerning the public comment. So I think this makes the most sense to put 1 right in between the following guidelines and members of the policy.
Yeah, and especially when we were just remote, we did that often.
Yes, yep. So we would take 1 over from our policy and put it into that little gap. So number 1. And then we would get into the actual A, B. And so what I did was I just went through these obviously to see what our alignment is. There's almost symmetrical alignment. Again, not a lot has changed, but there's a few subtle differences as compared to the last policy we looked at. So, for example, A, citizens and employees of the Hermon School Department are welcome to participate as provided in this policy. Others may be recognized to speak at the chair's discretion. Individual employees. We obviously have more members of the public because we don't, citizen is a very broad term. Citizen of what? So we just say members of the public, and obviously we allow people to speak, and they can be from any part of Maine. Well, I guess I shouldn't say Maine public. We never had anybody from New Hampshire that I know of. Everyone puts a Maine town, so I think that language fits a little bit better, members of the public. So I think we should switch to their.
Get technical regarding citizenship.
No, citizenship, I like members of the public. We ask them to put their town and state their town. So I think that works for us right now. There obviously are districts moving to, you have to be a resident of this community. That's not something that, again, we don't, at least that's not my perception of how the board feels. It just hasn't, right? We haven't done it that way. So I think this better reflects what the committee has followed.
Just the word public.
Yeah.
So that all public is available or has the opportunity.
So we would go to their language, members of the public, obviously, Hermon School Committee.
I feel like we should match the language for E instead of speakers, that we should say members of the public.
Okay. Yep. I like that idea. Same thing, members of the, so you think that, same thing with F, all speakers?
Yeah, I think we should keep the language the same so there's not confusion.
Okay. And it's interesting, they have members of the public, but then they also delineate to people who work for the district, employees, which are members of the public, so I don't know why. I feel like that was put in there so that if a school committee didn't want to hear from one of their employees, regarding an issue, that's kind of like a way to keep them from speaking.
Or maybe in whatever year it was,
Yeah, 2000.
members of the public meant those who lived in town.
Yeah, yeah. I don't know why they do have that delineation.
Like a glossary with definitions.
Yeah, it's like the alphabet soup for education.
Yeah.
So you obviously have individual employees, and we have them welcome employees to speak. The big thing there is obviously there is a grievance procedure, so they should not be bringing any type of grievance to the school committee because there's a grievance procedure per their contract. So they should.
Is that what the intent maybe was when the policy was written back then, to kind of define it so that if you, yes, you're a member of the public,
Right.
but you also work for the district, but you're bringing public information for an agenda item, not a concern that you have during your employment.
Yeah.
So that back then, that might have been how it was defined or guidelines set that way back then.
That's probably.
I don't know.
Yeah.
Very accurate.
Yeah, I think you're
Well,
probably
you
spot on with that.
I think, that might have been the intent back then, so
Yeah.
that if an employee, yes, they're a citizen or part of the public and have the opportunity to speak, but that if they had a grievance, that they didn't bring it to a public meeting, they followed the procedure. So that might have been a guideline back in 2004 when the policy was worked on then, so.
Yeah, that's a good point. So if we work our way down from A to B, obviously you're the same there. You're the same in C. You're the same in D. You are the same in F, minus now we're going to put in members. You have the same language in, did I say F already? Or did I say E?
F.
F, thank you. So F is the same. G is the same, minus the obviously committee versus board. Okay, so your H, the current one, has one less statement, and it is the personal matters. So at the bottom of the sample policy, it says personal matters or complaints concerning student or staff issues will not be considered at public meeting, but will be referred through the established policies and procedures. And then obviously for H, you have no complaints or allegations will be allowed at school committee meetings concerning any person employed or against any particular student. So that again, just is going back to that complaint policy, and we're not going to take, right, the committee's not going to take complaints regarding items that should be addressed through the chain of command as established in other policy that you have. So I like that addition because it just points people back to, again, what the protocol should be. Top of page 3 on the sample, I is the same. J is the same. K, persons who disrupt, is the same. And they have an L, and I think this is important. This, I do not believe, was an issue in the past, but it is important that if you had an emergency or a substantial disruption, that's at the chair's discretion. The chair can call a recess. So you can have a recess, break for 5 minutes, come back. I think it's important to have it there. I would strongly recommend having that in the policy, just that that can occur. Any thoughts or concerns with adding that as part of the policy?
No, I agree.
Yeah.
Okay. An agenda shall be, so on our own policy, we have 3.
There's 1, 2.
What's that?
Yeah, I missed 1, 2 when I printed it.
Mrs. What?
So it says, this is page 3 of 3, correct, but then on 3 it starts with the number 3 instead of the number 1.
When I printed. Yeah, questions 1 and 2, or items 1 and 2 didn't print off.
No.
So, yeah, 1 and 2 are on the front. So 1 and 2, then you have A, B, C, D, yeah.
Gotcha.
That's why.
Okay, so, let me back up.
I was going to check my
Okay, so I skipped 2 by accident. Let me back up to our policy 2. During a school committee meeting, members of the community may speak with time limitations on matters of immediate concern within the jurisdiction of the committee. The open forum period will be listed on the agenda. So,
open forum meeting, public comment section.
well, so this is the during a school committee meeting, members of the community, right, we already have that. So, you have to by law.
Right, I was just.
So like we have that on, oh, where's my sample policy? There it is. We have that under the board will designate a portion of its agenda as an opportunity for public participation during the time allotted, and then we added an additional public comment may also be invited. So we're just taking, sorry to skip that. So we're taking 2 and we're dispersing it into those 2 paragraphs there
Page 1.
of page 1.
Yeah.
Then we take 1 and we put it into the gap above
Right.
members and the following. Then we come to 3. So when you mesh, sometimes the policies, it gets challenging. So 3, a citizen who wishes to, so this would then be 2, right? Because we've already had 1. We've interplayed 2 into the regular language, so this would become 2. And a citizen who wishes to have an item placed on the agenda will present the request in writing to the superintendent/chairperson. So that can be to both, but obviously the chairperson sets the agenda, so if they send it to me, I have to send it to the chair, and we would talk about that item. So I think this is, again, another good thing to have in there, because somebody can certainly make a request to put something on an agenda. That does not mean that it would get on as an agenda item, but it is a way, again, it's another vehicle for an item to be placed onto a school committee agenda.
What about communicating if that request has been granted or not? Like, to have that in the policy?
I mean, you could certainly say, you could add a sentence like the superintendent will inform the party whether or not that will be on the next agenda. They will know once the agenda gets posted as well, but it could be added as a matter of policy. My only recommendation would be, so Thursday is, so you can't, that's not enough time.
Right.
The agenda is already set for Thursday,
Oh,
right? That's the
Thursday's
day it
prior.
goes out. So I said, I crossed out Thursday and wrote Monday preceding the meeting.
Which, yes.
Right, which would give you your 7 days.
Right.
Right.
And that's typically, like today, I'm drafting the things that I would like to talk about, and then we'll meet tomorrow and talk about my, right, and his items, and then things we heard from the last meeting and set the agenda. So I feel like Monday is like the bare minimum for something to get sent. Obviously, you'd love it to be way before that, but I think Monday is that kind of that drop deadline of, if you would like an item and you want to see it on the agenda, it has to be, and at least that gives you a week before, the Monday the week before. The good thing is if it's a holiday, then we're Monday the next week, so we still have enough time if we get it Tuesday.
Right.
But I think that definitely has to be changed because Thursday, the agenda's set. And it's going out that afternoon.
I do think we should try to consider how to write something in about, just letting them know if it's been, or when that will be addressed or something in writing.
Or if it's already been addressed and be able to provide them with information if it had been an agenda item before and there was discussion.
The
around
request
it.
will be, the request
Reviewed.
would be,
So the request must be made, received by noon on Monday. Yeah, and notice, I even like the time, because again, 5:15 on a Monday is not enough time. Received by noon on Monday preceding the meeting. You could put something like, the citizen will be informed of the decision. And that leaves it open to either myself or the chair to say, thank you, this will not be, or thank you, this will be, or however they deem necessary. It will be, but we feel like it's a May item, not a January item. Maybe it's about budget, I don't know. I'm just trying to think of different things.
the request will be reviewed, considered, and decided upon.
So we could say the request will be considered and the citizen will be informed.
Member of the public, what would we call them?
They call him citizen, we call him citizen.
I know.
Yeah, the member of the public,
Yeah.
yep, member of the public will be informed of the decision. I think that just makes it, we want to leave this open so that, again, the right person can respond. Mr. Keith may want to respond, I might want to respond, we might want to say it later.
Will be
Just gives you
informed by
flexibility.
the chair or superintendent chair slash chair.
Yep. By chair or superintendent. Then, so that's your 2. Then you move into old policy 4. All speakers must observe rules of common etiquette. School committee will allow 10 minutes of deliberation. Personalities or complaints about specific individuals must not be ejected. The speaker in violation of these rules may be required to leave. So violation of permit your leading consideration of the matters for which the meeting was called. So this is not a practice that the committee does, right? We actually read something that says, Mr. Keith reads something that says, we'll listen, but that doesn't mean we're going to deliberate. I do not believe we should have this in here because it's not current practice and we don't deliberate on items. You already have your agenda set, so you're just taking in this information. So that would be my recommendation, but certainly would.
Yeah, I agree, we aren't using this, but also I feel like the previous, if someone wanted something added, then they would put that in writing, it would be considered, so I feel like number 3 helps.
So in trying to dig a little on this, I spoke with an administrator who's been here a long time, and I said, why would this be in here? And he said, because the committee was then taking and making motions after public comment, and you can't do that. So they had to put it in policy, like you can't take and make a motion after a public comment, right? You've already had that opportunity to adjust your agenda, right? Like make decisions. So he said that in the past, this administrator said that in the past, there was some, oh, let's take a motion on that. That's like, oh, you can't do that, that's against, like, you didn't put that on your agenda, you can't do that. So he said that was kind of the history, the administrator said that there was a history behind that. I haven't given it away who that was. And then accept an emergency situation. So again, there's no applicable situation where the school committee will decide upon a question from public comment. That's just not good practice. And there's nothing from an emergency standpoint that would require the school committee. If I had an emergency as the fiduciary manager of the buildings, we'd call an emergency meeting and make a decision. But everybody would be well informed. We're not going to jump the gun. So then we transition back over. So you have your L, you have your 2. So we've added in 2 with a little bit of language on the request and the citizen, the member of the public. An agenda will be published in advance of each meeting in accordance with policy. So just so you know, I met with Ms. White this morning just to go over our where we post. So you're supposed to identify your locations. So we send the agenda to the school website, Bangor Daily, Penobscot. I'm going to say Penobscot Theater.
Penobscot Times.
Thank you, Penobscot Times.
That's the name of the.
Yeah.
The weekly.
I was going to say, it was the weekly.
It was the weekly.
Yeah, the weekly, that's right. We have in-house to our school. We have our HEA reps, our SU 87 reps, town of Hermon, so we send it to Mr. Barry, and then obviously our school committee. So that's where we post, and we will put all of those into our policy. And then this is one, obviously, like we're sitting here right now, opportunity for public participation at board subcommittee meetings is not required, but may be permitted in accordance with the board's policy and or rules pertaining to operations of subcommittee. So we don't really have rules for subcommittee. We just have the rule of, right, in a public meeting, you have to provide for public comment. So you don't have to provide it anywhere else, so we don't provide it like right now. So that would be something that we could recommend to the school committee, that again, we can welcome public comment at a subcommittee meeting if we deemed it to be appropriate. So if we had something we wanted to talk about and we wanted the public to speak, if we didn't feel like it was worthwhile, or it was going to delay, or we didn't think it was necessary for board governance, we don't have to allow it. So it just gives you the flexibility.
I think it makes more sense to have it at the school committee meetings because everybody's here. If it's just us, then it's us hearing it and then taking it to them when they're doing the first reading.
Right.
And then giving input at that point.
Right. And I think that, to me, makes more sense. One of the things that we could certainly explore is pulling on parent representation to subcommittees for appropriate policy. I talked with the superintendent at Falmouth on Friday, and I said, how do you handle subcommittee? How do you handle people who already have opinions and thoughts on especially controversial items. And he said, we pull in parents for our subcommittee, for some of our subcommittee. They have two, they have finance and policy, right, which is pretty standard in most districts. And he said, we try to have a couple of parents as representatives. And same thing, as you know, as I said at the beginning, if we ever had a meeting where we need the principals here, we're gonna invite the principals. If we're gonna, to me, this is all pretty standard stuff. It's all coming from main school management, and ours are all pretty close. We don't need a lot of input, but there's certainly things and times when we might want to pull in parents, and I think that's a good way. And then you have your first reading where people can give their thoughts and opinions on that.
Yeah,
Good idea.
yeah. Also, we have those, other things that we have to follow, like the school, the union, and the contract that teachers have and the input that they get as well.
Yep, and we, for the next meeting, if we look at IJJ, which is on the agenda, we'll definitely have a representation from the teachers there, because again, we just want to make sure that, that was my thought, was at that next meeting, bringing in not only a parent, but also make sure some of our teachers are sitting on that as well. So, I think it's a good thing when you're trying to incorporate that, and you certainly allowed, we're making recommendations that allow quite a bit of public comment, so, or public opinion to be, input to be shared.
I think that's a good idea.
Okay. Okay. And I think the cross-references, I didn't mention any of the cross-references, but as I reviewed those, and I think all our cross-references were were spot on, so. Okay, so looking at the agenda, I feel pretty good about where I'm at in respect to IJJ. I've got one more step to go through, and I am in the process of talking with main school management. I talked a little bit on Friday, but didn't get to finish that conversation. So planning on bringing IJJ forward to the next meeting, and then I don't know if I'm going to try to put anything else on that.
Yeah, that would be a long discussion.
I mean, we'll have a lot of people here anyways from a, roundtable discussion, so if I feel like we can do more, I will, but I feel like that's enough. Okay. So,
October.
let's see here. So next meeting.
Is Monday a good day?
Depends.
True.
I'm gonna get 2 phones and see if I can come.
So obviously you're out for, you got the 9th as a holiday, 10th as a holiday. And I'm pretty slammed that week with the holiday. So I'm saying, because if your goal is that first reading for November, I think the week of the 24th for me is honestly really wide open right now.
Does that work for you, Chris?
I'm thinking I might, right now when I look at that, I have the same meeting that I had to leave early today to get here, so I'm thinking maybe Tuesday.
Okay, yep.
The 25th.
That whole week is really good for me right now.
25.
So the 25th?
Is earlier.
We could do 4, because I don't have that.
Okay. So the 25th at 4. We'll say it right here for right now, and I don't think we'll run into any scheduling conflicts. I like the mics. What? Yeah? I mean, even better than,
It's better than the regular meeting.
even in a regular meeting where it's a small classroom, right?
Well, these are brand new, they're nice.
Yeah, but I was just thinking, Craig, like, when you're sitting listening to us in a classroom, and we're at tables, like, these mics are better.
I think so.
Okay,
Yeah.
okay. Yeah, so we'll plan on right in here at 4 o'clock on October 25th.
Sounds good.
Okay. And like I said, if I make a mistake in respect to when this comes out on Thursday, please let me know, because Jody will try to have these ready to go for first reading for the October 3rd meeting. Okay, thank you, have a great day. Oh, hour 10, that was close.
Perfect.
I just, the policy we printed is, BEDH, but you guys are actually discussing BED, which is a little different. And that's not what you printed out, so.
Sorry, yeah. I wrote it on the agenda wrong.
Mistake.
And what you printed was wrong. Like, I couldn't follow the whole time, I didn't want to let you know, I didn't have the right information. You just guys took community rules, right?
Nope,
No?
no, public participation. BEDH. Right, that's what I'm saying, all right.
The BEDH? Yes.
Yeah.
Yep.
Put it on the website.